covered a few of those. But first, I've got my time here to go over some Division II guys that certainly are poised to make some waves at the next level. And I think, guys, that it's only right I lead with a guy who made a splash this year on the D2 scene, and that is out of West Florida, wide receiver John Giles. This dude, you see the high point right there? He does a hell of a lot of that for the Argos this year. He was an absolute menace for them. Really enjoy the way that he plays the game. You talk about an absolutely athletic freak, the way he's able to have these kind of just wild circus type catches when it comes to aerial, like body control. You see this breakaway speed right there. He also plays with a physicality that I think a lot of wide receivers lack. Just going to talk up all these guys. You see the tape for yourself, though. This guy lines up anywhere in the offense over there for the Argos. You talk about his journey started at Fort Scott, went to Virginia Union, had a couple breakout years there, and then finally really busted on the scene over at West Florida and won a lot of big-time games with the Argos. And a guy that we've had on the show, much in part due to the throwing of Pee Wee Jarrett, is a guy that maybe I won't talk too much about today, but a guy that is also pursuing a professional career. Those two benefited a ton from each other. Obviously, you see all the tape here. That quarterback-wide receiver connection was a good one. Now, back to John. He was named an all-star at the College Gridiron Showcase, which is a good spot for a lot of these smaller school products to go out in kind of a Senior Bowl type setting, competing against other potential prospects and draftees, that kind of thing. He was invited to the Hula Bowl, second-team All-American this year, was also a Harlan Hill nominee. That's pretty wild as a wide receiver. Love to see that. And he was number 12 in the top 25 small school prospects from CBS Sports, which there's another player just in a little bit that we'll talk about that has also made that list. But I will show you guys that one. But that's something that, when you get put into a lot of these different publications, those are just things that raise your draft stock. And you might think that something as little as being mentioned in an article isn't that big of a deal. But for a guy coming out of Division II school to be put on a list with a lot of these other people, that's a big deal for these guys. So this is the announcement right here from West Florida football. It says wide receiver John Giles was named as one of the top 25 small college draft prospects by CBS Sports. And I'll open this up for you to take a look at. But what you'll notice when I say small school products on here, I'm talking about Division II, Division III, and NAIA football players. This small school prospects, most of these guys are not D2, D3, NAIA. We're talking about guys that are FCS players predominantly. Those are technically small schools when it comes to the NFL draft and those kind of things. But you go down this list here and you get down to number 12. I do believe we've got two other athletes that are really small school products on here. One of them is D'Angelo Hardy from North Central, but there he is, John Giles right here. And the blurb here from Emory Henry says that Giles is massively flying under the radar. I was at the College Gridiron Showcase where everything he did from route running to catching the ball looked rather easy. He's got good size at 6'2", 205 pounds, as well as good acceleration to create separation necessary to be successful. Giles was a late call-up to the Hula Bowl and was able to step in and perform well. So all kinds of glowing remarks there about John and his ability to step into some of those things and just make an impact right away. I think that's a really appealing part of his game is he's just made the most out of multiple situations that he's been in. And I think this last season for West Florida, that combo with Pee Wee Jarrett, who's been great in the passing attack over there, under a great offensive mind in Coach Nobles, let's not let that go under the rug either. All of that comes together to kind of be a really convincing case and argument for John Giles coming out of West Florida. We'll actually stay with the Argonauts, believe it or not, for our next player. And I should have asked if I don't have any film on him currently wearing like the blue and teal or whatever it is. But John McMullen, the defensive lineman from West Florida, is a guy that has certainly made a lot of noise this past year. I had the chance to play with John while he was at Northern, and that's the tape that at least I have of John. But it does not matter what colors this dude is wearing. He has been a dog all throughout college. This man was the Gulf South Defensive Player of the Year in his first year playing in the conference. He was also a first-team All-American, if that means anything to you, which it should. But I think the number one word to describe when it comes to John's play style is just disruption or just destruction, either or. You see it right here. the ability at which he's able to just manhandle opponents. There's a look at him, at least in the West Florida uni right there. But you'll see some tape from back when he's at Northern Michigan. The ability for him, you see the speed at which he comes off the edge. He's been, the knock on him, I think, throughout the years is that maybe he's a little bit undersized when it comes to comparing to some NFL caliber offensive linemen. He has never let that stop him, and his use of his hands, I think, is probably the most impressive thing that I've seen when it comes to John's play style. He's got some of the fastest hands. He also has a really great get off of the line of scrimmage, which cannot be underrated or undersold, but his hands are what separates him from a lot of the competition that he's had to go up against in his last couple of years. Let's look at his stats here from the last year, though. He's listed at 6 foot, 255, so not exactly a small fry, but you talk about a guy who's come off the edge a lot. 6 foot is not the height of a typical defensive end, so he does face some criticism when it does come there. He's played a decent amount of interior defensive line. You see here his ability to get back and just body and manipulate offensive linemen. But right here, look at the stats from this past year. And when it comes down to it, had 51 total tackles, 34 of those were solo, 22 tackles for loss for over 100 yards, and 12 and a half sacks, along with 3 forced fumbles to go with that. 6 QB hurries as well, if you're into that kind of stat. Those things jump off the page, right? I don't care who you're playing, which, by the way, he did play some really solid competition this year in the Gulf South. Those things jump off the page. We mentioned that he was the Gulf South Defensive Player of the Year this year. He's up here training in Marquette at Advantage, being represented by David Greger, who we've had on the show, Bull Rush Sports over there. Going to give him a good shot. And like I said, you watch this film and you see the variability at which he's played really every position on the defensive line front. I'm not sure where exactly he's going to end up or in what kind of scheme or system, but watching this, you can tell the dude's got a ton of upside. Like you talk about those hands, the extremely quick get off, and the physicality at which he plays. Not to mention, he's a smart football player. He understands his assignment, his role in a lot of these plays and these schemes, and I think that's what really sets John apart from the rest, if you will. So there's my endorsement on John. I've had the pleasure of seeing him play in person, and a lot of people have had the misfortune of seeing him play directly when they line up against him. But another dude that is a literal physical freak is a man that we already had one wide receiver on the list today. We're going to add another one to it. Kyle Sheets out of Slippery Rock is a guy that we've also had the pleasure of having on this show. And man, if you have seen any of Kyle Sheets' film, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This dude has the frame of an NFL wide receiver, and to go with that, he's got, you see the separation speed here, and every piece, every tool in the toolbox that you could ask for of a big pro-style wide receiver is in this young man right here. Kyle Sheets does it all for Slippery Rock. He's listed at 6'4", 220 on the roster on the Slippery Rock website, and seeing him play against these defensive backs, I don't even think that's a stretch. You see how he matches up against some of these DBs. He is towering over these guys. And he has done an incredible job. He's a guy, too, I think it's worth noting, that came to Slippery Rock right out of high school, developed physically inside of their strength and conditioning program. Also, really, not that he's reached his ceiling, but he has definitely closed the gap and gotten a lot closer to seeing that full potential in his 4 or 5 years over there developing with the Rock. We know the storied history and tradition that program has. Kyle has just been definitely a piece of that. You talk about some of the records he has in that storied program, given that, with that being said, he's 3rd in program history in career touchdown receptions, 4th in career receiving yards, 7 in receptions, 13th in total touchdowns. You just go down the list, right? 2-time All-PSAC West. He was a first-team All-Region selection and a consensus All-American. For those of you who don't know who that means, it means everyone said this dude is the best of the best. AFCA, AP, D2, CCA, and Don Hanson. All 4 of them, right? To have that happen, I don't know if you realize how impressive that is. We don't really see a lot of that at the D2 level, or I guess just any level in general. This dude was able to amass some pretty great accolades. And when you look at the stats for him throughout this year, It looks like here. Throughout the career, I should say, this year he caught almost 1,200 yards and 17 touchdowns, which was his best year by far. Over his career, though, he has tallied over 150 catches for over 2,400 yards, 29 tuds, and an average per catch of 15.8. I think any wide receiver in the country would take those stats in a heartbeat. He was averaging 85 yards per game this last year, was a big-time red zone threat. Obviously, when you're that height, it comes into play that they're going to target you when they get down into the scoring zone there, the gold or the red zone, depending on what kind of scheme you're in. So shout out to Kyle. Also on that top 25 small school prospect list from CBS Sports, so I'll be sure to read that blurb real quick for you. And then I have one more thing to mention when it comes to Slippery Rock and that wide receiver room. But the blurb here on CBS says that Sheets was a legit machine and a big play deep threat at Slippery Rock. The 6'2", 222-pound wideout has above average acceleration to separate from defenders and the ability to track the ball well. He left a very good impression on scouts in attendance at the College Gridiron Showcase. Another guy that's taken advantage, of a lot of these opportunities to go out and compete against these guys in a lot of different fashions. But this is a really cool piece that I wanted to finish on before we stopped and moved on from Kyle. And this is from their wide receiver coach over there at Slippery Rock. Take a look at this. The only wide receiver duo in the country over 1,100 yards each. Both developed out of Slippery Rock, out of high school, and both are now going to have opportunities at the next level. Kyle Sheets and Cohen Russell, man. That is one of the coolest stats in Division II. And he's right. The only wide receiver duo in the country with over 1,100 yards each. Those two, I believe, are both top 5 or top 10 in the country. And to have a duo like that, and they've got a dude over there in Braden Long who can sling the frickin' rock too. That helps, obviously. But you see the rankings and some of the stats from their passing attack this last year. Over almost 4,000 yards through the air, first in the PSAC. Touchdown catches also first in the league. All of those first in the league. Yards per game, completion percentage, 41 points per game. And that's just the passing attack, by the way. These guys were a big part of that. Kyle Sheets was a huge part of that. I wanted to make sure I mentioned that before we moved on because I think as a team that is such a cool award, and as a coach too, to have these guys that you bring out of high school and you cultivate and turn into, because of them and also because of coaching, there's obviously that balance, turn into just these monsters, man, that are ready to go play at the next level. I think that's a post that any coach across the country is willing to hang their hat on. That's pretty special. We will move on, though, from Kyle, and we'll move on to a guy that got, I believe is the only one on this list, that got an invite to the NFL Combine. And I would show you the actual 40-yard dashes that he had. I'm going to talk about him a little bit, but I can't show those because of copyright. Or else I won't be able to, have his video up. But you can go ahead and search those up elsewhere on your own and find those ones. This man, though, Willie Drew, is a corner from Virginia State that has made a lot of noise here in just the last couple months. You're going to watch the film here and you will understand exactly why. Willie, like I said, like I mentioned earlier, did get a invite to the Combine. You'll see some of the clips from his game tape here. And some interesting pieces about Drew is that he started at James Madison before he made the transfer over. He was the CIAA Defensive Player of the Year this year in the conference, showed out at the Senior Bowl, so was also invited there, made a lot of really good plays, and was the only man on this list invited to the NFL Combine. What's cool about that also, Willie was actually only one of 2 HBCU players that was invited to the Combine. He's from Virginia State. The other guy was an offensive lineman from, I believe, Howard, I want to say, which is the D1 FBS squad. His 240 times, I mentioned them earlier. We're talking a 4.48 and a 4.47 for the kid. That's pretty good. Anything sub 4.5 and you are in business, you're talking about a legit draft stock potential. Now, not the biggest guy in the world. At a position, though, where that isn't nearly as important as you talk about some of these other spots that we've mentioned on this list already. On the roster here for the Trojans, he's listed at 6 foot 185. So certainly not a bad frame on him. He isn't maybe the thickest in the world, but he's got a frame where he can put a little bit of weight on. Right now, though, you look at the playmaking ability that he has. An absolute ball hawk, I think, in all terms of the word. We talked about ball tracking skills earlier on with some of the wide receivers. You know, great defensive backs have that same capability as well. he showcases it, I think, in a lot of this film right here. Flies around the field, very instinctual. Maybe not the most physical defensive back you've ever seen, but this dude flies around and just flat out makes plays. His speed, his acceleration, playmaking ability. He's going to have a bunch of different opportunities at the professional level. Well, whether that's in the NFL or not, who knows? But this is a guy that should certainly be on a lot of boards heading into April and heading into draft season. I know a lot of people that are fans of small school football are really excited to see what Willie has going on here shortly. We can pivot, though, and go back to the offensive side of the ball. I love talking about these guys after we've had them on the show. We have not had the pleasure of having Willie on here, but this next guy we're going to talk about, we have had the pleasure of having him join the show. That is Devin Garrison, a.k.a. the Unicorn, widely regarded as the top tight end, the premier tight end in Division II football. This dude has done a lot for the Pittsburgh State Gorillas over there. And you'll take one look at this and kind of understand where I'm coming from with that. And like I said, regarded as probably the best tight end in D2 football, there are some other guys that certainly could be in that conversation as well. But when you look at this film, I'm going to rewind that so you can take a look at just a couple of these catches one more time. Please take a look at this first one. And again, one hand's always pretty, but like, catch it with two, I don't give a shit. Look at the catches this dude is able to make. And one, the wingspan on this human is incredible. It is wild. The quickness that somebody that is 6'6", 240 pounds, they should not be able to exhibit this kind of quickness and quick twitch energy. You see breaking off the routes and things of that nature. My goodness. I would by no means, again, say that this guy is a bruiser maybe by any means of the word, but there's so many. We'll talk later about a guy and Alex Larson at the D3 level. Not every tight end needs to be this inline sixth offensive lineman. Devin is a great example of a guy who functions really as just a gigantic wide receiver, and you can put him in line and have him block. He has those kind of capabilities. That's not exactly the bread and butter of his game, but coming from a program with a tradition and the history of Pittsburgh State and the style of football they play over there, they win and lose games in the trenches. He's been a part of a lot of downhill, dominant run games. And this dude does it all. Like, he really does it all. He came in from Iowa Western Community College before he was with the Gorillas. And we've had the pleasure of just watching him turn into the player that he is today. Really incredible. 44 career receptions for the Gorillas at Pittsburgh State. By the time he got there, 726 yards, 9 tuds. And that was before this year, I do believe. Yes, so we got his final career stats here pulled up from their website. 97 catches, almost 1,600 yards, 15 tuds for the kid. That's incredibly impressive. And we're averaging over 16 yards per catch with him, too. Another great number right there. So Devin Garrison certainly does it all. He's a guy that needs to be on a lot of different boards. And when I mentioned the fact that the dude is 6'6", 240 pounds, and you watch that tape and see what he's able to do, that's textbook definition of a tight end and what that position has turned into, and a unicorn, because there's not a lot of guys at that size and that height that can move and exhibit the quickness that he is able to do. So he was a big part of Pittsburgh State's success. They were very close to going on an even further run this last year if it wasn't for Grand Valley. And speaking of the Lakers, let's talk about one of our D1R athletes. That's Abe Swanson, the man that played middle linebacker for a star-studded Grand Valley State defense. This dude, I think, to me, what stands out about Abe is he's the epitome of a sideline-to-sideline type of player. Abe is a dude that is not the biggest dude in stature. I never even realized that until I stood right next to him. You watch this dude play with a level of physicality and just confidence you would never even notice. And I remember standing next to him the first time, I'm like, dude, like, you play like you're 6'4", 250. Like, that's just the kind of style this dude plays with. And that's certainly going to be a knock on him going to the next level, but there's so many other redeeming qualities about Abe that I think he's going to overcome it because he's done that in the past, right? That's not something that's going to allow him to hold him back. he had, you look at the senior stats, I guess just look at some overall stats from Abe over the years. Listed at 6'1", 222, senior out of St. Charles, Illinois, and this dude did it all for Grand Valley. Let's look at the defensive statistics here on the season. 90 tackles, and he had 10 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, a fumble recovery, and then also tallied 3 interceptions. That's big time. 3 pass breakups as well, a couple quarterback hurries in there. Dude filled the stat book across the board and did all of it against some really good competition. When he had his best game, you see the highlights here. Teams like Ferris State, Harding, Pittsburgh State. These kind of squads that are top 5, top 10 in the country, that's when he's coming out and performing at his best. Even squads like Davenport and the GLIAC, which is a perennial contender, right? Like those kind of teams, that's where Abe steps up the most. And I said it earlier, he's a sideline-to-sideline guy that is just incredibly quick. And I think what is going to separate him at the next level is his ability to make plays in space. He's played against a lot of really great athletes that are shifty in their own right. His ability to close the distance and make plays on those guys, I think is what's really going to give him a good shot at the next level. But I could talk all day about that dude. I've appreciated him coming on the show, him being a part of this D1R athlete kind of movement that we've started, and just everything about him. Abe Swanson's a first-class human, and I'm excited to see where he ends up. He knows he's got a couple fans in us over at D1 Rejects over here. With that being said, we'll finish off with one more D1R athlete for today before we go over to the Division III players, and that is the ball hawk from Ferris State, also in the GLIAC. That's Sean Stevens. And Sean is a guy that bust onto the scene, especially when it comes to the GLIAC. He was at West Liberty last year where he led the nation in interceptions. And you see here, man, this dude, that's what he built. He's built his brand on, right? Is interceptions and being able to go and steal the ball from opposing offenses. That's what Sean does best, and that's what he's been able to do at a very high level, whether it be for West Liberty or whether it be for Ferris State. This guy had offers to go play at Colorado and Purdue before his NCAA eligibility was called into question and was not able to take that jump to the D1 level. So what does he do? He goes to one of the powers, the reigning defending national champions in Division II, and is able to do a lot for them, became a big part of their squad this last year, and I think what he's been able to do with them is nothing short of incredibly impressive. You look at his stats, this year, and 8 interceptions, 19 solo tackles. He had 25 total, and 1 pick six. That was a big-time play as well. But like I said, when you have a guy that has built his brand around being able to take away the football from the opposing team's offense and win that turnover battle for his squad, no matter what colors he's suiting up in, going to give him a really good chance at making it to the next level. He's got connections with his cousin, who is actually, I believe, who is currently with the Steelers. But Sean has a ton of upside. Talk about a guy, too, that is still got to get to, like, he's not even anywhere near his ceiling. He's AFCA All-American this last year, obviously All-Conference. He was one of the players of the year in the GLIAC Conference, which in itself is a really awesome accolade to achieve. But Sean, one of those guys that has a lot of really good football left to be played. So we'll have more guys next week that we'll evaluate when it comes to D2 level. Some more D1R athlete guys too as well. I mean, I got to get those guys on there and show them some respect. But we will have more of a list. Per usual, though, if you know there's some guys out there that I missed, please include them in the replies, the comments, DM me, hit me up on socials, whatever it is. If there's guys out there that I'm missing, let me know. I'm going to get them on here. With that being said, let's move over and talk some D3 ball with Jimmy Martin.